Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes, like many on the far right, have stated that their ancestors have nothing to do with them, meaning that if their ancestors participated in pillaging villages, enslaving people for profit, it has nothing to do with where they are today. Well, I'm here to show you that their ancestors not only laid the foundations to their success, but they have directly profited from the exploitation and disenfranchisement of the Black American population. Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes both have shallow roots in Chicago. Their ancestors are almost all recent immigrants. At least 90% of their recent ancestors consist of people with no roots in the United States. Starting with Charlie Kirk's family tree, it is full with Irish and Polish immigrants who came as recently as the 1900s, and a few German and English immigrants who arrived at the wake of the Civil War. His family is overwhelmingly full of people who gave up their countries of birth in need of a second chance. It was too hard for them to make a living back home. So they went to the United States to take what wasn't theirs and to step on the backs of Americans in order to elevate their situation. Charlie Kirk was born to an architect, Robert Willard Kirk, and a teacher, Catherine Smith. Catherine's an immigrant, straight from Ellis Island. Well, her recent ancestors were, at least. Both of her mother's parents were born to Polish immigrants. Her father's mother was born to Irish immigrants. Her paternal grandfather was a child of French-Canadian immigrants. Her paternal great-grandfather was a child to Irish immigrants. During this time, many Polish and Irish immigrants were moving to the United States in seek of a better life. Meatpacking was dominated by Polish immigrants, and the majority of immigrants in the city of Chicago during this time were Irish. Robert Willard Kirk, Charlie's father, has many immigrants on his tree as well from Germany, England, and Ireland. But then there are some surprises that caught my attention. Charlie Kirk is a descendant of people who had ample help from the government. You know, they didn't do it all on their own, not by a long shot. Charlie Kirk's third great-grandfather, Hiram Willard, owned a clothing store, and not just any clothing store, one that specializes in leathers and furs. The store recently went out of business in 2021.
One family has embodied that expression for 157 years. At the corner of North First and West Main in Marshalltown, Jonathan Hull is the fifth-generation owner-operator of Willard's Furs and Fashions.
It was my great-great-grandfather, Hiram Willard, that founded the business.
Hiram started the store in 1864.
He heard about Marshalltown at that time because it was a railroad hub.
A fast-growing frontier town, and Hiram's tannery flourished.
They would have railroad cars full of pelts.
Because furriers around the world,
monkey pelts, jaguar pelts,
quickly came to know the place.
Ocelot, leopard pelts from Africa.
For high-quality work at a fair price.
He was a very honest and trusted person in that profession.
Business took a huge turn around 1910 when Jonathan's grandfather, Willard Hull, got involved.
It expanded into making garments and fur robes and rugs.
And coats.
And even today, there's nothing warmer than a fur coat.
They weren't just fashionable. At the time, they were highly functional.
Back then, they didn't have goose down polyfill.
After World War II, Willard's annually made hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in today's money from mink.
And it still is today probably the most durable, best wearing that you can get.
Now, what was Hiram Willard doing in Marshalltown, Iowa? First, let me explain how he got to Iowa. Hiram was born in Maine to Hiram Willard Sr. and Sarah Scribner. Hiram learned tannery from his father, and he wanted to take his skills on the road, and that he did. He started out working with none other than Jesse Grant. Jesse was the father of the General of the Union Army, Ulysses S. Grant. According to the history of Willard's Furs and Fashions, prior to moving to Marshalltown, Hiram worked at a tannery in Galena, Illinois, owned by Jesse Grant. Ulysses Grant also worked in the business before the Civil War broke out. Hiram would take trips into the Dakotas and Montana, where he would trade beads and pearls with the Native Americans for pelts that he would bring back to Marshalltown and process into goods he would sell to the people in this area. Trading with the Native Americans didn't end well due to exploitation. The Dakotas and Chippewa tribes were pushed to compete with other nations for goods as the increased demand from the European colonists grew. The tribes became reliant on these European goods such as iron cooking kettles, weapons, gardening tools, dyes, alcohol, and many other products that the Native Americans say made their lives easier. Eventually, European traders did not want to trade with the native population, and they began to steal their land to start their own businesses. Hiram Willard contributed to that destruction of the Native American communities, all in the name of fashion, and so that the generations after him may have an easier life. If you think that is a fair way to go about making an honest living, then we have a different definition of what is just and ethical. Hiram's obituary reads, in 1854, he went to Marshalltown, Iowa, and became one of the city's most prosperous merchants, a pioneer in certain industries, and is spoken of as a public-spirited, broad-minded, charitable. The Marshalltown paper speaks of the deceased as one of the most eminent and helpful of the city's pioneer residents and businessmen, and his sad taking off is a great grief to the community. Remember that date, 1854. Now, according to Marshalltown's historians, Marshalltown is described as a city with a rich past and glowing future. But that depends on who you ask, because this area was taken from those who were already there. Allegedly, they signed treaties giving up their land. The Sac and Fox Indians signed this treaty with the U.S. government to open up the land for settlement in 1842. They claimed the Native Americans agreed to move west of the Red Rock Line by 1843 and exit Iowa completely by 1845. Marshalltown's first European settler was Henry Anson, who arrived in 1851. So no Native Americans were allowed to live in Marshalltown, and that meant no free people of color as well. In 1851, Iowa introduced the Iowa Exclusion Act, which declared, from and after the passage of this act, no free Negro or mulatto shall be permitted to settle in this state. One law stated that no black person could come into the state without a certificate of freedom, proving that the person was not a runaway slave. There were enslaved people in the state despite Iowa entering the Union as a free state. The famous case involving the enslaved man Dred Scott started here in Iowa. Dred Scott lived in Davenport, Iowa in the 1830s with his enslaver, Dr. John Emerson. We know that Dred Scott was never granted his freedom despite the number of years he spent living in a free state. Black Americans often had to organize their own cemeteries because it was illegal to bury blacks in their cemeteries. These racist laws encourage European American Iowans to discriminate against black Iowans. Section 2388 says, who competent, every human being of sufficient capacity to understand the obligation and oath is competent witness in all cases, both civil and criminal, except herein otherwise declared. But an Indian, a Negro, a mulatto, or black person shall not be allowed to give testimony in any case wherein a white person is a party. If you can't testify against a white individual, that means they could do absolutely anything to you, including murder, and you could not do a thing about it because the law said so. This gives Hiram Willard an astronomical advantage. What a way to wipe out any competition. This is a significant amount of help to receive from the government, which would give every European family an advantage, and in this case, Charlie Kirk's family. They were not necessarily qualified or merit-based, just simply the only one available to do the job. This goes against the core of some of Charlie's beliefs.
If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. Because of DEI, it begs the question when you see a black pilot, you wonder, you say, I hope they are qualified. If I'm dealing with somebody in customer service who's a moronic black woman, I wonder, is she there because of her excellence, or is she there because of affirmative action? It almost creates thought patterns that are not necessarily, no one really cares when it's HR managers. No one cared when it was, just kind of paper shufflers or even engineers. But now when it's like, wait, hold on a second. You're going to remove my appendix and you're a black lesbian.
So Charlie's ancestors weren't qualified. They took their place by force. By 1870, there were only 33 people of color living in Marshall County, Iowa. By 1889, the year Hiram Willard died from falling down the steps, around 105 black Americans were living in Marshall County. The number of black people in the state of Iowa by 1885 was around 9,300, with the white population hovering around 1,800,000. The bulk of the black community lived in coal mining towns. Adverts in many states attracted some black Americans to move to Iowa, like the Jones family. Furthermore, Iowa participated in Jim Crow policies. In 1942, a law prohibited no Negro, Mongolian, or person of 1/8 Negro or Mongolian blood can marry a white person. In 1943, the law was expanded. It prohibited marriages of whites with anyone with 1/8 or more of Negro and Japanese or Chinese blood. 1945, Charles and Annie Toney faced racial discrimination in Davenport. They were refused service by a waitress by the name Dorothy Baxter at the Colonial Fountain in Davenport. The Toneys won the case, and the waitress admitted she was against civil rights, just like Charlie Kirk.
We note in our piece that Kirk describes King as, quote, a bad guy. It's true. And Kirk self-described very, very radical view that the country made a mistake when it passed the Civil Rights Act. Also true. As we note in the piece, Kirk has previously described Kirk as a hero and a civil rights icon. It's true. I used to be wrong. What inspired Kirk to shift his view on MLK? Why does Kirk think that MLK is a bad guy? When Kirk says that MLK says, quote, one good thing he didn't believe, what does he mean by that? Why does Kirk believe passing the Civil Rights Act was a mistake? Now, again, apparently they don't listen to the show.
What a shame. As for Charlie Kirk's family's ties to owning plantations and enslaving outside of the tolerance of those who enslaved people around them, you can look to his 5th great-grandfather, Shadrach Stanley. He was banned from the Quaker Church for marrying outside of the church and was reprimanded for purchasing an enslaved person. Now, as for Nick Fuentes, he has next to no Americans on his tree, so there isn't much of an American story there. Nick Fuentes has only one ancestor that was in the United States prior to the American Civil War, his great-grandfather's family, Mary Barrett. Her father, John, was born in New York State around the year 1840, but his parents were born in Ireland. So Nick's father, William, or should I say Guillermo, Bill Fuentes, is half Irish and half Mexican. His father was Jose or Joseph, which is Nick's middle name. Joseph was born in Chicago in 1932 to Mexican parents, Simon Fuentes and Dolores Lola Sindra. As for Nick's mother, Lauren Chico Fuentes, all 4 of her grandparents were born in Italy. This is why genealogy is important. Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes contribute to division within communities and speak from a place of conviction as if they are God. These men come from families who do not exemplify their ideologies, but are in direct opposition to all they stand for. From Nick Fuentes' mixed race background to Charlie Kirk's government-assisted ancestors. Where would they be if the United States didn't offer their ancestors a second chance at life and sent them back to their countries of origin? As humans, we must not look at our appearances, but look within. After all, it all started with Adam and Eve. Don't ruin the generations that come after you. Be kind and look out for your neighbor. You never know when you may need their help, like their ancestors needed America. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more American Hidden History.